Hey everyone, my name is Sabour Amirazodi, and I come from a motion graphics and visual effects background. And usually I would talk about some fun client work that I've done in the past and how I accomplished some of that work. But this time I want to talk about something a little unique. I want to talk about a Halloween projection show that I created for my kids and the neighborhood. Now there's so many elements that made up this show that this is going to be more broad strokes just because there's just so much that went into it. But hopefully we can learn some of the tricks that I discovered along the way and how powerful Cinema 4D is in executing a lot of those tricks and giving artists like myself the tools to accomplish those tricks. Now, it all starts with trying to figure out how I'm going to map onto a surface. And the way I do that is, there's applications that can do that. If you're interested in projection mapping in general, Mad Mapper is one of the tools that I use to do this structured light scan. And it's really cool. You point a DSLR to a house or an object or whatever you want, and it shoots a bunch of lines. And every single time it takes a picture of the lines, it translates those lines into an image on the camera, and then eventually it creates a perfect point of view of that projector. And then once you have the point of view of the projector, you now have an image to base a 3D model off of. So now you can use a lot of the basic tools in Cinema 4D, the camera matching tools in Cinema 4D to recreate the scene. So that creates the first environment for the house. And once I have the environment of the house, then I can even take it one step further and use a bunch of fun tools. Like for example, the new iPhones have LiDAR scanners in them. So you can use like an application like Polycam or something where you can do a 3D scan of your house. So I actually played around with doing that as well. I grabbed my phone, I started walking around the house and got a little 3D scan, and then boom, I got an FBX file that I exported out of Cinema 4D of the entire front of my house. That way I can just do some basic mapping, right? And last year it was fun because I was creating certain elements like the Beetlejuice sandworm, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to make it look like it was coming in and out of the garage, and garage doors were breaking apart or looking like there's some depth to it, and a lot of that was my kind of first time exploring that world for my house. And it was a lot of fun because I learned, some basic rigging tools in Cinema 4D using just creating this basic sandworm. But this year I wanted to take it a step further by animating and creating some new scenes. A couple of the new scenes that I created this year is an entire Oogie Boogie scene, and it's basically when you can see it right here. It's this big Oogie Boogie where the whole house shifts to the right. And now we're in this world in Nightmare Before Christmas where Oogie Boogie is cranking his saw, and you have this fun little skeleton kind of struggling, and you have Oogie Boogie just cranking this saw around. And it was fun trying to create that element and piecing together how to rig this whole animation, which we'll kind of touch on a little bit. Another scene was this mayor from Nightmare Before Christmas, and my daughter had mentioned that it would be really cool to do Ursula from Little Mermaid. So figured out how to animate Ursula and animate Flotsam and Jetsam using some of the fish tools, the fish character rigging tools. It's incredible. And then last scene that I kind of wanted to add, I added a little bit of Nightmare Before Christmas with the hitchhiking ghost and rigged those guys up really quick. But then I also wanted to animate the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and just have him looking like he's looking down at everybody. And so all in all, there's so many fun scenes that we were able to create. So let's kind of start diving into each one of the scenes and start talking about how we use a lot of the tools in Cinema 4D to create it. So I think the first scene that we should probably dive into is let's dive into the Oogie Boogie scene. So one of the ideas that I had was it'd be really cool to have our skeleton and our saw blade spinning the entire time, right? So Oogie Boogie may be cranking a wheel or something like that. But how am I going to animate our little skeleton? So let's hide our saw blade, and let's dive right into our skeleton. So the first thing I'm going to do is up here, we want to go to our character, and then we want to just click on character. And then in here, we have a bunch of different templates that we can choose from. So in my case, what I ended up doing is just a standard biped. We're not doing anything advanced. We're just trying to get a basic setup, right? So once we have that basic setup, we click on root, and that's going to create our root. And then we click on spine, and that's going to create our spine. And then we can hold down control and press on our arms, and then we can also do the same thing for the legs. Hold down control and press on our legs, and it automatically makes our left and right leg, right? So the first thing I'm noticing right away is our rig is large. Oh, don't forget the head. Now we have a rig that's large enough. So one of the things that we can do is we can just scale our whole rig down by using our object mode. And then just kind of get it to the right scale, generally speaking. And I know you're supposed to be doing this on a T-pose, but in this case, we're not doing a T-pose. We're just slapping this thing together. Once we have our character there, we can just go to adjust, and what that's going to do is it allows us to adjust all the different components. So we can turn off our object selection mode so we can actually move our components where we need to. Now, right now it's symmetrical, which is fine for our purposes at the moment. Just kind of get things into position. You know, there we go. And move this guy over here. Let's turn off symmetry. Move this guy here. Move that guy to the wrist. And again, this is super quick and dirty because I'm just trying to get a bunch of scenes done, and I want to try to go on to a lot of other different scenes. For my purposes, it's really more about getting a lot of fun things for the kids to look at and not necessarily spend way too much time on it, because at the end of the day, we're just trying to entertain the kids and the family, and we want it to look as cool as possible, but we don't want to get too crazy with it. So generally speaking, you want to just kind of position everything, spend a little bit more time than I'm spending right now, get everything in their respective positions. And once you do, and you bind our character by already selecting our skeleton, what that does is we now have all these different cool control points. Now, at this point, we can select our hands, move those around, make them shift around right here. I can even select the top of the head and then rotate that around so he's looking around. Same thing with the torso. We can rotate the torso around. Obviously, the weighting is a little bit different, but a little flawed, but that's probably where I'm going to be rotating. So the whole idea is I want it to look like he's kind of struggling the entire time. So I was trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I make this, into a struggling type scenario without actually getting too crazy with hand animating or hand keyframing things? So what I actually ended up using is I used a tool called Signal. It made by Grayscale Gorilla. A really cool tool that allows me to quickly animate various different parameters without getting into too much detail and not having to hand animate everything. So let me go ahead and open up my scene that already has the signals all applied. So right here, if I press play, you could see our guy's struggling around. And the way I did it is, you can see I can click on any one of these, like the head controller, and within the head controller I have my little signal tag, and my signal tag has a random noise effector. And what's nice is I can just change the variations of all the different rotations, in which case that's all I wanted it to do, and I can modify it. If he's spinning his head a little too much, I can zero that out, so now he's not spinning his head as much. Looking around as much, let's go ahead and crank that up even more so he's rotating left and right a little bit. Maybe I don't want him to get too crazy. And then what's nice is I already have the loop point here set to 600. So now I can render out 600 frames of this animation, and you can see at frame 600, everything loops back with no seams, no jumps. And I did that with every single one of my objects. So With my hand controller, I did the same thing. I had him rotating around. I also did the same thing with my torso. So if you click on the torso right here, if I can actually click on it before he goes away, let's stop the animation. So you can see on my torso controller, I have the same thing. I have my position set to move left, right, up, and down, and then our loop point is at 600 frames. This is a really easy way to add some random rotation, random movement to a character without getting too crazy with the animations. So based off of this is actually kind of how I decided to animate our next scene, or our next character, which is Oogie Boogie. Now, I took it a step further also, so we can see after I was done with the whole animation, I also did like a little rotation on the entire saw. And now you can see how the saw is going to rotate around, and using the exact same tool, I have my little rotator tool, my signal tool right here. And within the signal tool, I have under my output, under my signal tool, I have a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 1080 degrees. And I have the end frame at 500 frames. So then at 500 frames, it kind of settles into place, and then it just kind of sits and rests until 600 frames. But since everything else is already on a seamless loop, I can render out 600 frames, and if I have a full 1 minute show or 1 minute segment of my projection show, I can use After Effects to just loop those 600 frames. So these are kind of like a little bit of the tricks that I use is render out, a smaller amount of frames. If you're trying to do a 1 minute loop, maybe render out, 300 frames or even 30 frames or 60 frames. But if you have a loop, you can indefinitely make that animation last a lot longer. And if you offset a lot of those loops, it starts to feel a little bit more organic. So let's dive into our next character that we want to rig up. So here we have an Oogie Boogie character. I found this model on Turbo Squid. It was super cheap, but it was a game model. And the first thing that I tried to do is just add a subdivision surface, just because the original texture was, the original geometry was all triangles, obviously game ready, right? But even when I added the subdivision surface, I was like, there's just like, the topology just isn't the greatest. And I knew I was going to run into some issues if I were to try to rig this and do some weight painting and any animations. I've just noticed that whenever I try to animate with triangles, you get some random spikes. So the first thing I needed to figure out is how to fix this. So the way I fixed this was, let's just go ahead and dive into here, is after I kind of retextured it using body paint and Photoshop by using a more realistic burlap texture, then I wanted to figure out a way to retopologize that. So here's the original topology right here, and let me pull up our little lines mode. So the way I did this is we can go ahead and use our remesh tool and make that into a child of here and of this object. And right away we're going to start seeing, okay, cool, now we're getting some nice remeshing, a different topology, and we can start to we could say keep outline. We can try to do only quadrangles, and we can maybe even change the mesh density if we really wanted to. But all in all, we see some really good results doing it this way, right? So you can keep tweaking this to your heart's content. Another tool, if you don't want to use the remesher, which is very incredible, but if you want something with a little bit more symmetry, another option is also using a third-party plugin called Quad Remesh. And what that does is kind of generally the same exact thing, but we have some additional tools like symmetry. And then when we go ahead and click on remesh, didn't click my object. Click on remesh, it goes and does this little remesh algorithm. And now we have a new mesh that is slightly cleaner than what we had before. And now we have to figure out a way to take the previous texture, which is comprised of a handful of different materials, and apply it to our new mesh. Now, if it wasn't for Chris Schmidt and Aaron throwing up this amazing tutorial on how to do this reprojection of textures, I would have never been able to figure this out. And there's a YouTube video if you look up Rocket Lasso, and I think it's Rocket Lasso photogrammetry, and then you'll see the method in which they actually transfer the materials back into a new re-topologized model. It's pretty incredible. The basic premise is you add a reflective object or reflective material onto the retopologized version, and then you do a normals move by selecting all our polygons, and then going to normals move, shortcut MZ, and then when you click on, you start to drag, you can actually start to puff out your model. And essentially what you're doing is you're also reversing your normal, so now they're all inward facing. And then at that point, you take your original model and then you reproject onto a new UV mapped textured model, which I've prepared here. So this is our now UV, our brand new UV mapped 3D model with nice clean topology and new textures that we can start to animate. So that's actually the next step, is we're gonna have to try to figure out how to animate this guy. So what's the best method to animate? We can go ahead and delete all of these objects right here. So now we have our little, our Oogie Boogie. And the way I did this is I used a slightly different tool, still the character animator, but a slightly different method of actually rigging this. So instead of doing the biped that we did for our skeleton, I dove into this toon rig, which ended up being super incredible. So the way the toon rig works is same type of premise. You add your spine, your root, and then you can add your arms by control clicking the arms, and it gives you a left and right. And then we go back to the spine. And then you can do your legs as well by control clicking the legs, same thing. Now control clicking just adds the left and right, just a little tip. And then you can also do your face, add your face. You also have a couple different cool little tools, like you can add wings and a ponytail, in which case I actually did end up adding a ponytail for this little flap on our Oogie Boogie, so it's kind of moving dynamically. And once you have that, let's hide our Oogie Boogie, you can see how we have a lot of really, really cool controllers. It looks complicated, but it's actually not that bad. So the first thing you have to realize is it's all pretty self-explanatory. You could see the outlines of everything that you need. So there's your mouth, there's our eyes, and you have all these different control points that all you have to do is just click and move into position by going into our adjust tab. Once you have your adjust tab, they're just points that we move into position. So if we bring back our model, you can see if I grab my face, my entire face rig, so I think it's right here. There you go. We can move our whole face rig into position, right? So you can see now, okay, well, eyes are starting to get into position, and we can start to manipulate where the eyebrows are gonna go. We can manipulate where the eyes are gonna go. In this case, you can see our right eye, our left eye. I believe you can rotate this entire thing. Anyway, you just go through all the controllers, and what you're doing is you're just kind of moving them into place. It might take a little bit of time, but I really encourage you to just take a little bit of time, make sure that this is nice and clean, and you have all your positions where you need, like your nose and your nostrils and your mouth. Again, you have our mouth right here, and we can move that mouth into position. So let's see what it looks like after I've spent quite about 30 minutes on the actual model and getting it clean. So here we go. This is our toon rig with all the control points where they need to be. You can see the eyes have been kind of rotated around. If you see, if we go back to our character, we can go from adjust to build, and you can see how all our outlines are there. We can go back to adjust just to kind of see where all our little positions are. And then you can see where our ponytail is. And then when we're kind of going through the entire process, we're going to do the same type of thing that I had mentioned before. So in this instance, I now have everything in position to where everything's rigged and it's weight painted. And what weight painting is, let's just kind of dive into that for a second. This took me a second to kind of understand. But what weight painting is, it's essentially like the blending between the different parts of your object. I guess the best way to demonstrate it is to actually double click on the skin, and let's go to our character and go to our weight tool. So when we go to our weight tool, we should be able to see our weights. So here's our weights, and what these are is the influence of each particular section and their controllers. And I'm sure there's a better explanation of this, but from my basic understanding is it's essentially if I click on this little controller here, it's just going to influence this part, but it's going to blend nicely into the forearm and then into the biceps, because each one of those controllers are painted to control just that section. And at first, when I was weight painting, one of the things that I was running into is, let me see if I can open up an earlier weight painting that I had some issues with. So one of the issues that I was running into is my weight painting was very sloppy and it was very harsh. So anytime I grabbed an object, let's say, for example, this arm, I was getting all these weird creases, and you can see when I moved this arm around, it was pinching here. I was just struggling because I didn't know how to properly paint weights. But what I ended up discovering here is under the character tab, there is a weight manager, which allows so many incredible tools that I just wasn't aware of. Where you can select all your weights, for example, and you can just smooth them all out. Again, there's tutorials that go into a lot more depth with regards to how to actually do all this, but you can click on mode, add, or smooth, and you can say apply to all. And if even if I just go to apply to all, you'll see, there you go. It just went ahead and smoothed out the weights by blending each one of the weights to the next weight. So if I were to just paint this section right here, for example, that was just the torso, it would be too harsh. It would be too much of a jagged edge. So I can just click on smooth and then just keep clicking on apply all, and then it'll keep smoothing and blending each one of these weights together. So that was one of the things that took me a minute to figure out. But once I figured that out, I was able to get much better results. And then to take it one step further, C40 has this pretty amazing new effector called Delta Mush that you can throw under the hierarchy right here. I have it disabled right now, but once you enable it, what it does is it also tries to further smooth out any of those weight painting issues. So when I have it off, for example, you can see I might get some pinching here and there. Where my weight painting might not have been the perfect or the greatest, because I'm not an expert. I just started figuring out how to do this character animation stuff about a month ago. So, but see, if I turn on Delta Mush, you'll see you get some better results. And what's nice is you can click on Delta Mush here, and you can boost up the iterations, and you'll get some different results. And you can see if it's smoothing it out to whatever degree that you'd like to smooth it out. So now how do we animate Oogie? Now that we've got him rigged nicely, how are we going to animate him to be kind of like our skeleton? So I kind of did that same thing before, where I picked a controller, and in your character tab, you'll notice that you're only seeing the base level controllers. You're not seeing all the specific hierarchy. And the way we show that is when you click on your character, you'll see all these little tabs here. Just go to display, and we can go here, and under managers, right now it's just set to components. But if you do full hierarchy, that's where we actually can see all our different individual sections. So now I've selected our arm controller here, so we can see. And if I press S in our object manager, it'll jump right to our hand controller. So now if I want to, I'll show you how I added a signal tag. So if I go to tags and I go to signal plus, now I have our hand controller. And what I want to do is I want to modify the position, all the position properties. So I've selected all the position properties, and I can drag that onto our signal plus. And then you're going to see right here, right off the bat, we have add modifiers. So what I want to do is I want to add a noise modifier. And once I add a noise modifier, you're going to see now we have variations for X, Y, and Z. So if I press play, you can see, oh, look at that. He's already starting to move around. And I haven't added any keyframes. I'm just simply adding a couple different values. So I can do 20, 80, and I don't know, let's do another 20. So now his arm's just kind of moving around and flailing around. And that's really all I'm looking to do. I'm not looking to do a full animation or a walk cycle or anything like that. I just want him to be a little bit lively and move around. So let's jump into a scene where I also added a parent constraint, because I was trying to figure out, okay, well, now I got to figure out how am I going to get him to crank a wheel. So I wanted to crank a wheel, and I wanted to figure out a way to like have his left arm on a stack of something or holding on to something, just because quite frankly I was just running out of ideas on how to get this guy to animate nicely. And you can see his ponytail is kind of dynamically kind of flapping in the wind. It's a little aggressive right now, but it's still there. So this is just kind of my first attempt in animating this whole Oogie Boogie, right? But if the way I kind of accomplish this guy right here is, again, we click on this hand controller, and then we can press S in the object manager to navigate directly to it. And what I did was I added a constraint expression, or a constraint tag, and we can go through tags and then go into rigging tags and then go to constraint. And once we do that, we now have this constraint tag, and then all I did was select parent. And then under parent, I need to tell it, okay, what is the parent object that I want to constrain this to? So what I ended up doing was, if we go into here and see our parent, I have it at our attach point, which I created an attach point that is on this cylinder. So if we go to our extrude cylinder and our cogwheel, I've added a attach point on the cylinder, and I've also added another signal tag to the crank. So that signal tag is just simply saying, just rotate 360 degrees in the negative axis, and I want it to loop every 30 frames. So for every 30 frames, it's made a full 360 rotation. Now I can make it 60 frames, and you can see it slows down. And because we have our null object in the cylinder, attached to the cylinder, which is what I've labeled it the attach point, we've parented our hand to that attach point. So now we have what looks like a Oogie Boogie that's cranking a wheel. And you can see kind of as we keep evolving, I started adding some additional scenes. So now I've put in our skeleton scene, and we have our crank. I added a couple different pieces of dice stacked up here, and you can see now we have his mouth is moving, we have our skeleton flailing around, and we have everything kind of animated together, all with no keyframes, just using signal and all these different random effectors or random nodes within signal. And then I started to add the entire scene together, because Now, remember, we're still trying to project onto the garage. So now we have our elements, but now we have to figure out, okay, well, we still need to put this into a scene. So I can hide our house frame now that we know where our house frame is for reference. But what's nice is I wanted the whole house to look like it's rotating out of the way. So you can see how we're going to achieve that. So that's going in from our big house, and I attach the entire house to a large wheel, and I have the entire house just rotated around that disc. And then it kind of settles into place. And everything's kind of got a little bit of a springy motion. I'm actually using the great Cactus Dan, may he rest in peace, is an amazing tool set that he developed that was all recoded to work with the newest versions of C4D. So I use a lot of his tools just because they're just amazing. They're amazing tools. But one of the tools that I use is just I added a little springy key tag to our disc. That way we have that little like springy motion to where when everything kind of settles into place, we have that nice little movement. Everything rotates out of the way, and we have a bunch of fun dice, and we have a single tag on the back dice with a Cactus Dan effector to make those keyframes or those movements springy. And same thing, we have our skeleton being cranked left and right, and we have Oogie Boogie cranking that wheel. His hair his little ponytail is moving all over the place, and then we have everything rotate back and then show our original garage. So that kind of completes that whole Oogie Boogie scene from start to finish. It brings in our scene and then takes away our scene, so we can transition into our next character, so to speak. We needed to create this little snake character, and the way I did our little snake, and let's see if we can dive into this. Okay, so I'm not a modeler. I can model a little bit, but there's some really fun modeling tools that make it so much easier in order to kind of create this little snake. And this snake is the snake that we're going to use to kind of create that snake going in and out of all the Oogie Boogie cloth. So what I wanted to do is, for the Oogie Boogie scene, I wanted to have all this waving cloth, the burlap, and I wanted to have the snake kind of going through the burlap in between. So we'll see the snake kind of slither through in a second. But I'll also show you guys how I did the burlap. So there you go. We have our little snake kind of going in and out of the burlap. I thought that was a really cool element that we could add to the scene. So let's just dive into how we created the snake. So first thing I did was I actually looked up the snake plushie toy. On the options over here on the display, we actually can go to configure, and under configure, we can go ahead and click on the back. You can click on any background that you want. So I went ahead and clicked on my snake background. And then from here, I just started building out a bool object. So essentially, I grabbed a loft. I actually added a loft that extended all the way from the front to the back, and kind of just kept tracing the objects. And then I duplicated that loft, and then kind of modified the loft to add the little lip lines. But at the end of the day, this is a super crude model just based off of a bunch of loft NURBs. And you can see I have a loft 1, loft 2, loft 3. They're just a bunch of different elements just hacked together. And this is kind of what I was saying before about, there's modelers out there that are absolutely incredible and put everything that I'm doing to shame. But when you're trying to get things done in a quick and dirty way, because at the end of the day, we're just trying to entertain the kiddos and the neighborhood. I'm not trying to go into feature film categories in this particular. Obviously, we can spend a little bit of time, but in this case, I'm just trying to get something done in like about 20-30 minutes. So I'm just having a little bit of fun grabbing these loft NURBs and stacking them together. But what's the final magic sauce for me was, added the bool object to kind of cut out the eyes, is the volume builder was such a game changer. So once you're done with all of that, you throw everything into this volume builder. And what the volume builder does is it creates almost like a volume of voxels around all the hierarchy underneath it. So now we have our bool object, we have our 4 different lofts, and everything's kind of smashed together. And we have the symmetry object for our 2 eyes that are cutting out the bool. And we can start to adjust our volume builder to try to get a little bit more detail out of it. So I went from like 3 at its default to like 0.5 inches. And then once we're done with that, we can then go into our volume mesher. And then when you do our volume mesher, now we have like this really nice, clean volume. And then we can use either our remesher or the extension, our quad remesher extension, and go ahead and remesh that volume mesher. And we're going to end up getting a nice, clean, retopologized version of our snake. And we can do a couple different methods of animating. There we go. We have a nice clean snake, right? So I was originally going to start animating that snake in the character animator, but then I said, you know what? There's just so many really quick tools that can get this job done faster. So then I took our snake, and all I did was I used the spline wrap tool. Threw the entire snake into the spline wrap, and then I animated the offset. So now in the offset, you can see our snake just kind of slithers around. No rigging, no nothing. We just took the entire snake and then threw it into a spline wrap, and then I created a spline throughout the entire object, and I made sure that the spline spun through and kind of tucked behind this little piece of cloth and went down this piece of cloth and kind of around this piece of cloth. And then our end result is we have this nice little snake that kind of goes through our burlap textures. So while we're at it, let's just talk about real quick how I added this waviness in this cloth. One thing that I figured out was a little trick to getting them all to wave at the same time. It was something that I was actually struggling with. So when we add our displacer, if we add our displacer to a handful of objects within the hierarchy, for some reason they don't animate together. So I actually had to take all my individual planes that I modified, and then I had to merge them all into one, and then that's what actually gave me my entire displacer that moved together in unison, if that makes any sense. But generally speaking, yeah. So the way I added a little bit of thickness is I grabbed our little plane object, and we have I added a subdivision surface and then a cloth surface just to add a little bit of thickness to our object. So now our cloth has some thickness to it, and I made sure that I made sure that in our plane here that we're displacing, the biggest trick that I had to do is I had to marry everything together. So if you see here, let's just kind of quickly select everything, and I'm going to turn off our subdivision. There we go. So if you see, all my little strips and my planes, these are all based off of just like really simple geometry that we added some thickness to after the fact. So it's just a plane that I just kind of took the magnetic tool and just modified and pushed around. And then I took, for these guys, I just took a basic cylinder and removed the top and bottom caps and shrunk them down. But the most important thing is you just got to make sure once you kind of find your base shape, then you just select all of it and then just go to object and say connect objects and delete. and all that connects all the objects together, so they're all essentially one giant object. And then we add our subdivision, and then we add our cloth surface, and then we add our little displacer to give us that little displacement with a basic noise. So the next thing that we wanted to kind of dive into is how do we animate Ursula? Well, let's start off with Flotsam and Jetsam, because I thought that was a really cool. I just thought it was really cool that Character Animator had the character tool had an actual fish rig. So here's a model of Flotsam that I purchased off of Sketchfab in the marketplace. Really, really nice model. And it's actually all vertex painted, which was pretty cool. Had a very cartoon look. I really love this model. So anyway, we go to character, and again, just throw in character right here. And then over here, instead of advanced biped, there's right here, fish. Go ahead and select fish. And what's nice is we can start adding, in our fish, we can add all our different control points. In this case, what I did was I added a handful of components for the spine, because you can choose how complicated you want the spine to be. And then you can also do fins, dorsal fins, and you can also add tail fins. So in my case, I added a dorsal fin for every one of these flaps, every one of these like sections of this fin. And then once that was all animated, or once that was all rigged up, then we just go ahead and click on our bind, and then we can see how everything is painted all nicely. It actually did a pretty good job automatically doing the weight painting itself. And then at that point, we can load up an animation, and we can see it's probably going to, let's see if we can load it up. Here we go. So now we can do a swim cycle. And there we go. We have a swim cycle of our Flotsam and Jetsam swimming around. And it's kind of nice. His tail flaps. It's all nicely animated. We can even modify some animation parameters under our main controller. We can say the nose wiggle, the tail wiggle, and these are all built in. So now I can make the tail really wiggle. And then we can also change the speed, so he's swimming faster. But in my case, I wanted him to just kind of coast slowly, because he's kind of a little bit more sinister, if you will. And then I, again, just for the jaw, added that little animation of using signal to animate his jaw kind of opening up back and forth. And then at that point, we just do the same type of thing. Take that entire rig and we throw that into a spline, a follow spline, and now we can have him swimming around Ursula the entire time. So we can see kind of what that looks like. So here we are. We have our Ursula, and we rigged up Ursula the same method that we rigged up Oogie Boogie and our mare with the character rig. And so now we can animate our Flotsam and Jetsam kind of going around our helix. I just added a helix object, 2 helix objects. So then I have Flotsam and Jetsam kind of swimming around Ursula. And then I animated Ursula coming up into the scene. And then I have her blinking every once in a while. And I have her eyes constantly looking at our front object, because we actually have a controller here, which is our controller of where the eyes are looking. So I also animated that to always kind of be looking at the front of screen, so it almost looks like Ursula is looking down at us at all times. And you can kind of see what the entire scene looks like at the end of it. Right here, you can see Ursula kind of pops in. There we go. So this is our Ursula scene. When she comes in, we first animate some tentacles. But then here we are. We have Ursula. She comes in to our scene. She's looking down at our crowd and taking up our entire field of view. And then you have Flotsam and Jetsam swimming around. Super, super fun. Yeah. So then our next, okay, I guess we can kind of dive in. This is one of my favorite ones that we worked on, is Ghostbusters. So I really wanted to do a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And so kind of same thing. Same formula, rigged up our Stay Puft Marshmallow Man using the same character tools, tracing out his eyes, and his mouth and all the good stuff, right? So his torso is all rigged up. Now you can see like mouth is opening up. We don't want to go. We're not ever going to go too crazy, but mouth opens up. We can click on his neck and have him look around. Again, super easy to use these tools. I again was never a character animator. I just in fact on Stay Puft I was even, this was a last minute addition. I was so lazy I didn't even weight paint it, so I just threw the entire thing on a Delta mush, and that actually fixed up almost all the problems that I had because it was just doing really basic movements. So here we go. We have a same type of formula. The only thing that I changed different from this and Ursula was instead of it just coming into frame slowly, I grabbed a building model and I animated it all the way up to the top. Now this is the burnt version of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, so I had two different versions that I ended up blending together. But you can see he's looking around, and so you can see this is what it ends up looking like on the actual house, projected on the house. We have Stay Puft Marshmallow Man come up, and he's looking around our entire crowd. And then you'll see when the ectoblasts, when the proton packs kick on right here, there we go. We transition, and then I added a little turbulence FD for the fire effects, and then he catches on fire, and our Marshmallow Man explodes into a bunch of white fluff. Now, one last thing I'm going to touch on, and again, this is broad strokes. I wish I could have an entire tutorial on just this, but I want to show you guys kind of how I did this scene right in the beginning. So right in the beginning of our Ghostbusters segment, I have the hooks and ladder, the garage door opens up, and I thought it would be really cool to just see Ecto 1's lights turn on, sirens kick on, and then Ecto 1 kind of drives out of our garage. I don't know, I just thought that would be a really cool scene, and I had to have it. So how do we do that? Well, we also have, Cinema 4D also has an amazing car rig. And the car rig was able to help me get the entire Ecto 1 rigged up and animated in very, very short amount of time. It took me probably about 45 minutes to kind of get the idea of the tool in place, and probably about 3 hours to finally get this car rigged up and animated. So this is what that animation ends up looking like. Ecto 1 drives off. It's got a little suspension wobble, and we have the garage door close, and we have the scene start up. So a lot of cool tools. Cinema 4D kind of helps me create all of these really amazing effects. It doesn't have to be just doesn't have to be just the film industry. It can also be little creative moments like this where we bring the entire community together. I get to see the joy on my kids' faces as they see all these different elements come to life in a tangible way. Just generally, anytime you can be creative and push these tools to their limits and let that creativity drive these tools, it's just a win-win. So thanks. Hopefully we all learned something. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask.